You don't plan to fall in love with your boss, especially when your job description explicitly says, no personal involvement. But love doesn't read contracts. When I first met Ava Sinclair, she looked like every untouchable woman you see on glossy magazine covers: power, grace, and danger wrapped in a black designer suit. The kind of woman who made men nervous and women curious. I wasn't either. I was broke, desperate, and 2 hours away from eviction. So when her assistant quit on the spot, and I happened to be at the cafe where she was yelling into her phone, I did the stupidest, most life-changing thing imaginable. I walked up and said, "I can start today." She turned those ice blue eyes on me. You? You don't even have a resume. I can type, I can handle chaos, and I don't cry easily, I said. That's better than most of your applicants, right? She stared at me like she was deciding whether to fire me before I was even hired. Then, with a slow smile that could melt glass, she said, 1 month. Trial period. Don't make me regret it. That was the beginning of my personal disaster or my love story. I still haven't decided which. By day 3, I realized Ava wasn't just demanding, she was impossible. She worked 16-hour days, refused to eat unless I reminded her, and treated emotions like weaknesses to be buried. Yet somehow, between the sharp emails and the midnight coffee runs, I caught glimpses of something else. The way she'd pause before looking at photos on her desk. The shadow that crossed her eyes when she thought no one was watching. I wasn't supposed to care. But I did. And then came that night. It was raining, one of those heavy New York storms that turns the sky black and the streets into mirrors. The office was empty except for the two of us. I was typing up her meeting notes when the lights flickered, and she sighed, running a hand through her hair. For the first time she looked tired. Not powerful. Not perfect. Just human. "Why are you still here?" she asked softly. "Because you are," I said before I could stop myself. The silence that followed was deafening. Her lips parted, eyes flicking to mine, then away. "That's not part of your job description." "I know," I whispered. "But maybe it should be." She didn't smile. She didn't speak. But when the next thunder rolled through the windows, she reached out her hand, brushing mine. Just a touch. Barely there. But enough to set my whole body on fire. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of guilt, but because for the first time in a long while I wanted something I couldn't have. Ava had rules. She lived by them. Rule 1. Never mix business with pleasure. Rule 2. Never let anyone get close. Rule 3. Always be in control. I broke all 3. It started small. An extra smile during meetings. A coffee left on her desk just the way she liked it, oat milk, no sugar, 1 shot of cinnamon. The way her hand lingered when she passed me a file. The way she began waiting for me before leaving the office. We were orbiting each other, too aware, too scared to collide. But desire doesn't care about rules, and hearts don't wait for permission. The breaking point came one Friday evening. The company was hosting a gala, a glittering, high-stakes event where Ava was expected to impress investors. I was there as her assistant, clipboard in hand, pretending I wasn't staring every time she walked by in that long emerald gown that made the whole room stop breathing. Halfway through the night, she found me on the balcony trying to catch my breath. "Why are you hiding out here?" she asked, her voice teasing but tired. "I'm not hiding," I said, staring out at the skyline. "Just needed a moment to remember who I am." Her laugh was soft. "And who's that?" I turned to her, feeling reckless. Someone who shouldn't be falling for her boss. She froze. Her eyes, usually so composed, flickered with something raw. Pain, surprise, maybe even fear. "You think this is a game, Lily?" she whispered. "No," I said. "But it feels like one. One I'm already losing." For a long time she said nothing. Then quietly she stepped closer. Close enough that her perfume, jasmine and rain, wrapped around me like a secret. "You shouldn't say things like that," she murmured. "Then tell me you don't feel it too," I said. Her eyes met mine, and in that moment I knew. I wasn't alone in this. But Ava Sinclair was a master of control. So instead of answering, she did what she always did. She turned away, whispering, "We're done here." We didn't speak for 3 days. 3 days of silence so loud it ached. She threw herself into work. I kept pretending I was fine. But on the 4th day, she showed up at my apartment. Soaked from rain, mascara smudged, looking nothing like the woman the world worshipped. "I can't do this anymore," she said, voice breaking. "Then don't," I whispered, stepping closer. She shook her head, tears mixing with the rain. "You don't understand. I've lost people before because of who I am, because of what I feel. I can't lose control again." And then I said the stupidest, bravest thing I've ever said. "Maybe this time you're not losing control. Maybe you're finally finding it." She looked at me like I'd just rewritten her whole world. And then she kissed me. Soft at first, hesitant, trembling. Then desperate, like she'd been holding her breath for years, and finally exhaled. Every rule she'd ever made shattered in that moment. And so did I. The morning after Ava kissed me, everything felt unreal. The air smelled different. The sunlight felt softer. Even the city noise outside my window seemed muted, like the world was giving us a fragile, borrowed peace. She was still there, half asleep, tangled in my sheets, her hair spilling like ink across the pillow. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked defenseless. No sharp heels, no cold expressions, no armor. Just Ava, the woman behind the title. I wanted to freeze that moment forever. But love doesn't wait. And neither does reality. When her phone buzzed, she stirred, blinking at the clock. I saw her face shift from calm to panic. "Shit," she whispered. "It's already 9. I have a board meeting." I smiled softly. "You also have a fever and you barely slept. You can't, Lily." Her voice snapped back into command mode. "Don't." That was Ava, always composed, even when her heart was still racing from what we'd done. She got dressed in silence. The white blouse she wore was slightly wrinkled, something she'd never allowed before. When she turned to leave, she paused at the door, her hand resting on the frame. "What happened last night?" she began, then stopped. I swallowed hard. "You regret it?" Her eyes flicked to mine, sharp, pained. "No. But I don't know how to be this person with you." And then she was gone. Work the next day was torture. She walked past me without a glance. No smile, no acknowledgement, nothing. The Ava Sinclair everyone else saw was back, flawless, distant, untouchable. But I knew better now. I'd seen the woman behind that mask. I'd kissed her. Every time our hands brushed or our eyes met accidentally, it felt like the world tilted just slightly, like something huge and dangerous was brewing between us. By noon, she called me into her office. The door closed with a soft click that sounded too final. "Sit," she said. I did, clutching my notepad like a shield. Her tone was cool, professional. "I need to make something clear, Lily. What happened between us can't happen again. It was a mistake." A mistake. The word hit harder than I expected. I stared at her, this woman I'd spent weeks admiring, protecting, falling for, and forced myself to stay calm. "Understood," I said quietly. But she must have seen the hurt on my face, because her voice softened just slightly. "It's not because I didn't feel something. It's because I did." For a second I forgot how to breathe. She looked away, eyes distant. "I've built my entire life around control. I can't afford distractions, not now. The board already questions every decision I make because I'm a woman. If they find out about this, they'll destroy everything I've worked for." "So you'd rather destroy this instead?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't answer. And that silence was worse than any rejection. That week, we became strangers again, at least that's what we tried to be. But you can't unfeel something once it's real. Every time she brushed past me, every time I caught her watching me when she thought I wasn't looking, it was there. The pull, the want, the fear. On Friday, everything collapsed. The company's biggest client, the Richmond Group, pulled out of a multimillion-dollar deal. It was a disaster. Ava's reputation, her leadership, her sanity, all on the line. She locked herself in her office for hours. No calls, no meetings. By 10 p.m., the rest of the staff had gone home. I was the only one left. I hesitated outside her door, then knocked softly. "Come in," her voice croaked, low and hoarse. She was sitting at her desk, papers scattered everywhere, her mascara smudged. A glass of whiskey sat half-finished beside her laptop. I walked closer. "You look like you've been through hell." She gave a humorless laugh. "Hell would be easier. At least there, people don't expect you to save the company while pretending you're not falling apart." I didn't think. I just moved, reaching for her hand. For a moment she didn't pull away. Her fingers trembled against mine, fragile and warm. Then she whispered, "Why do you keep doing this? Why do you care?" "Because I see you," I said simply. "Not the CEO. Not the image. Just you." Her eyes filled with something raw. "And if you knew how broken I really am, then I'd hold the pieces." That broke her. The next thing I knew, she was in my arms, her forehead pressed to my shoulder, her body shaking with silent tears. I'd never seen her cry before. It gutted me. She whispered into my neck, "I don't know how to be strong and love you at the same time." I pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "Then don't be strong. Just be human." And then once again our lips found each other, not desperate this time, but surrendering. A quiet, aching surrender. After that night, we didn't talk about what we were. Labels felt too fragile for something that intense. We just existed. Some nights she'd text me at 2 a.m., "Are you awake?" Other nights I'd find her waiting outside my apartment, too tired to speak, too scared to leave. I became her secret, her escape from the world that demanded perfection. But secrets have consequences. One morning, I arrived at the office to find the HR director waiting at my desk. "Lily," she said carefully, "Miss Sinclair requested to speak with you privately." My stomach dropped. When I entered Ava's office, she wasn't alone. 2 board members sat across from her, their expressions cold and judgmental. Ava's face was pale, her jaw tight. "Lily, please sit." I did, every nerve screaming that something was wrong. One of the men leaned forward. "We've received reports of inappropriate conduct between you and Ms. Sinclair. Specifically, that your relationship may be compromising her leadership position." My blood went cold. "That's not true," he cut me off. "We have photographs, dinner meetings, late nights at her penthouse. Do you deny being personally involved with Ms. Sinclair?" Ava's hand clenched the edge of her desk so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Lily, you don't have to say anything," she said quickly. "I'll handle this." But I could see the panic in her eyes, the fear, the guilt, and I realized she wasn't afraid for herself. She was afraid for me. I stood up slowly. "No, I'll handle it." I looked those men straight in the eye and said, "Miss Sinclair has done nothing inappropriate. If anyone's to blame for crossed boundaries, it's me. I misread kindness for something more." Ava's eyes widened. "Lily, don't," but I kept going. "She's a professional. I was the one who let it go too far." The men exchanged satisfied looks. One nodded curtly. "Thank you for your honesty. That will be all." I walked out before Ava could stop me. She found me in the lobby 15 minutes later. "Why would you do that?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "Because I can survive losing my job," I said. "But you can't survive losing everything you built." Her eyes were wet. "You think this is victory? Watching you walk away feels like losing my heart in real time." I swallowed hard. "Then let it hurt. Maybe it'll remind you you're still human." And with that, I left. The next few weeks were a blur. I got a temp job at a bookstore in Brooklyn, quieter, smaller, safer. But nothing felt right. Every time I saw a woman in heels or smelled jasmine perfume, my chest tightened. I missed her. Not the CEO. The woman who fell asleep on my couch, who laughed at bad movies, who once burned pancakes because she was too busy staring at me. But she didn't call. Not once. Until one rainy evening, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway of the bookstore. Ava. She looked different, tired, vulnerable, almost nervous. Her eyes searched for me, and when they found me, her lips curved into the softest, saddest smile I'd ever seen. "Hey," she whispered. I froze. "What are you doing here?" She took a shaky breath. "The board forced me to resign." My heart stopped. "What?" She nodded. "Turns out, integrity doesn't matter when people already decided you're guilty. But it's okay." "Okay. Ava, that was your life." She stepped closer, her hand trembling as it reached for mine. "It was my life. Until I realized it wasn't living. Not without you." My throat tightened. "You can't just—" "I can," she said firmly. "I lost everything except the one thing that ever made me feel free. You." I didn't know whether to cry or laugh. "You're insane." "Probably," she admitted with a small smile. "But I'm done hiding. I'm done choosing fear over love." The storm outside rumbled like a warning, but neither of us moved. And then, right there between shelves of dusty books and flickering lights, she kissed me again. It wasn't the reckless kind of kiss that starts fires. It was the kind that rebuilds from ashes. Quiet promise. A new beginning. Later, when she pulled back, she whispered, "I don't know what comes next. I don't even have a plan." I smiled, touching her cheek. "Good. For once, let's not have one." She laughed softly, the sound like music after months of silence. We stood there for a long time, two women who had lost everything but found each other. And in that fragile, beautiful stillness, I finally understood something. Love isn't about power, or control, or perfection. It's about choosing someone even when the world tells you not to. And she chose me. The first morning we woke up together without fear felt unreal. There was no rush, no alarm, no pretending. Just sunlight spilling through the cracked blinds of my tiny Brooklyn apartment, and the sound of Ava breathing beside me. For once, she wasn't the woman running an empire, she was simply Ava, messy-haired and sleepy-eyed, smiling against my shoulder as though peace was something she could finally allow herself to feel. We spent the morning in silence, communicating through touch, glances, and laughter that came too easily after months of tension. She made terrible coffee because she didn't know how to use my cheap machine, and I burned the toast. But none of it mattered. Because for the first time, everything felt real. Later, while we sat cross-legged on the floor with mismatched mugs, she said quietly, "Do you ever think about how fast everything changed?" "All the time," I admitted. 1 month ago, I was your assistant. Now you're making me coffee and pretending it's not awful." She smiled. "I'm trying to prove I can function without a staff." "You're doing terrible." "Then I need more practice," she teased. That small, playful banter, something she'd never allowed herself at the office, felt like a victory. Like the woman I'd fallen for was finally learning how to just be. But underneath her calm, I could still sense the lingering fear. The weight of what she'd lost. The world that had turned its back on her. And I couldn't help but wonder, how long could our little bubble last before reality came knocking again? Reality didn't knock, it crashed through the door. 2 weeks later, her scandal hit the news. Disgraced CEO steps down amid office romance allegations. The headlines were merciless. The same reporters who once praised her brilliance now tore her apart, calling her reckless, unethical, manipulative. They painted me as the naive girl she seduced for power. When I showed her the article, she didn't speak for a long time. Then she whispered, "I knew this was coming, but it still hurts." I knelt beside her, taking her hands. "They don't know the truth. They don't care," she said flatly. "To them, a woman in power can only be one of two things, cold or corrupt. I refused to be cold, so now I'm the other." My chest ached. "Then let them talk. We'll live quietly. We'll start over." But she shook her head. "You don't understand. The industry is small. My name is poison now. Investors pull out when they see it. My old colleagues won't even return my calls." "Then build something new," I said, desperate. "With me." Her eyes softened. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not easy," I whispered. "It's worth it." For a moment, she looked at me like she believed it. Like maybe, just maybe, the ruin around her could become the foundation of something better. The next few months were quiet. We moved to a small town upstate, trading the chaos of Manhattan for an old brick building that smelled of rain and possibility. She sold her apartment, her car, even her designer clothes, not because she had to, but because she wanted to let go. One morning, I found her painting over the white walls of our new place, wearing my oversized t-shirt and humming off-key. "What are you doing?" I laughed. "Starting over," she said. Literally. The blue paint streaked across her cheek as she grinned at me. I took the brush from her hand and kissed her right there, paint, laughter, mess, and all. Those were the good days. The healing days. She started writing something she'd always wanted to do but never had time for. A memoir, she said. Not about power or business, but about being human. About falling apart and finding love in the wreckage. And me? I began taking photography jobs. Small weddings, portraits, local events. Nothing glamorous. But every time I captured someone smiling through imperfection, I thought of us and how far we'd come. But healing isn't linear. Some nights, she still woke up from nightmares, boardroom voices echoing in her mind, accusations replaying like broken film. I'd hold her until she calmed, whispering, "You're safe. It's over." Other nights, it was me who cried, overwhelmed by guilt that my love had cost her everything she'd built. We learned to be each other's anchor, to remind ourselves that what we had wasn't the ruin, it was the rebuild. Slowly, people began to see her again. Not the CEO who fell, but the woman who survived. Her memoir drafts started circulating quietly among indie publishers. A journalist who once wrote a brutal article about her reached out, asking for an interview, not for gossip, but for truth. First she refused. "I don't owe anyone my pain." But later that night, as we sat watching the rain, she said softly, "Maybe it's time I stop hiding. Maybe it's time they hear what really happened." The interview was raw, honest, and beautiful. She talked about the pressure of being a woman in power, the loneliness of leadership, and the love that made her remember she was human again. When the interviewer asked, "Do you regret falling for your assistant?" she smiled, not bitterly, but with quiet grace. "I regret the world's reaction," she said. "Not the love itself. That love saved me." The video went viral within days. But not in the cruel way before. This time people saw her differently, as brave, vulnerable, and real. Messages poured in from women across the country. Executives, artists, young girls, all thanking her for daring to be both strong and soft. For showing that love doesn't make you weak. She cried when she read them. Real tears, the kind she used to think she wasn't allowed to shed. A month later, her book Unwritten Rules was published. On launch day, the local bookstore where I worked hosted her first signing. The same little shop where she'd walked back into my life months ago. She looked radiant, confident again, but gentler now. The storm had passed, and it showed in the way she smiled at everyone who came, in the way her laughter filled the room. When it was over, she pulled me aside, her hands trembling slightly as she held mine. "Do you realize," she whispered, "that everything began right here?" I nodded, smiling. "When you showed up in the rain." She leaned in, voice barely audible. "No, Lily. It began long before that. It began the moment you told me not to be strong. You gave me permission to be real." Tears stung my eyes. "You gave me a reason to believe in love again." She kissed me then, right there between stacks of books and strangers who clapped when they saw not scandal, not shame, but something beautiful. Months turned into seasons. We built a life that wasn't perfect, but perfectly ours. Lazy Sundays filled with pancakes and bad movies. Quiet evenings writing side by side, her with her pen, me with my camera. One spring afternoon, while we were walking through a nearby park, she stopped suddenly. "Lily," she said, her eyes glinting in the sunlight, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't hired you that day?" I smiled. "You would have terrified another assistant." She laughed, the sound free and unguarded. "Maybe. But I think I still would have found you somehow." "Why?" "Because some things aren't coincidences," she said softly. "They're collisions, inevitable, necessary, and worth every consequence." And in that moment I knew. Everything we'd been through, every heartbreak, every loss, every sleepless night had led us exactly here. Years later I'd find her old nameplate, Ava Sinclair, so buried in a box we kept under the bed. When I showed it to her, she smiled. "Keep it," she said. "A reminder." "Of what?" "That even when everything you built crumbles, love can still rebuild you." On the anniversary of her book's release, we stood together on a small stage at a literary event in Manhattan, not as boss and assistant, but as partners, equals, and co-authors. She'd invited me to contribute photographs for the second edition of Unwritten Rules, now subtitled A Story of Power, Loss, and Love. As she addressed the audience, her voice steady and luminous, I saw in her everything she'd become. Not the perfect CEO she once tried to be, but the woman who learned that vulnerability is its own kind of strength. When it was my turn to speak, I said simply, "Love doesn't always arrive when it's convenient. It arrives when you're most unprepared, and sometimes, that's the only way it can change you." The crowd fell silent. Ava reached for my hand. And in that simple gesture, I felt every moment that had brought us here, every heartbreak, every risk, every storm survived. Later, as we walked back through the city streets glowing with twilight, she whispered, "You realize this story started with a 1-month contract?" I laughed. "And ended with forever." She smiled. "Not ended. Just, finally beginning." I looked at her, the woman who had once been my boss, my heartbreak, my salvation, and thought of how far we'd come. The world had tried to break her. It had tried to shame us. But in the end, love had rewritten the rules. And maybe that's all any of us can hope for, to find someone who sees us not as perfect, but as possible. Ava squeezed my hand. "You still make terrible coffee," she murmured. I grinned. "And you still pretend to like it." She laughed, a sound that would forever remind me of sunlight after rain. And as the city lights flickered around us, I realized something simple and beautiful. She didn't just hire me to organize her life. She hired me to change it. And somewhere along the way, she changed mine too. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to get notifications about next videos.